Welcome back, everyone, to the Michigan Trails Report. I'm your host, Tom Funk, author of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, 50 Hikes There Within, and also 50 Hikes on the North Country Trail in Michigan and Wisconsin. In today's episode, we are going to hop back into the canoe and travel with Henry Schoolcraft and Lewis Cass as they explore Michigan back on their expedition of 1820. And as always, this comes to you by a sponsor, and our sponsor this time around is Nortive 8. Making quality footwear at nortive8.com. I use them myself. And with that being said, let's start getting underway. And like I've been doing with this, and this is our third installment, is I am basically reading right from his notes that he put into, I would call it a book. But I did clean up the punctuation and the grammar and his obsession with run-on sentences, but I did leave in a lot of the original language, and in 1820, some of this language was used commonplace, and in today's world, it would be seen as offensive. Please don't be offended by the language that was used. I'll try to explain some of the terms and kind of what they meant back in the day. And, words change over time. They change meanings over time. So what they were saying back in the day probably meant something a little bit different or something quite a bit different than what you hear in today's language. But anyways, let's get started here. We are taking 6 days of residence at the Mackinac Island, and he's going to be visiting some of the islands in the area, mostly the St. Martin's Island. And this is in 1820. It's June 7th. And he starts off by saying the island of Mackinac is 9 miles in circumference and covers an area about 7,680 acres. Its extreme elevation above the lake is 312 feet, according to the observations of the garrison, and 900 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, which is more than half the height of the highlands of the Hudson, and that's in New York. So he kind of pulls out some stats, some elevations elsewhere. So, for example, he mentions West Point above the Hudson is 188 feet. And as you get up the Hudson River, the highest peak that he can find where a river comes out of in the Catskill Mountains is 3,804, which is much higher, of course, than Mackinac Island. So he's just kind of drawing a comparison between the two areas. So here in this area, there are a lot of bluffs, and they appear to be sterile. They're covered with strong soil, which is continually renovated by the spontaneous decomposition of calcareous rock, and the island has been long. We are led to believe, very justly, celebrated for the salubrity of its atmosphere. It contains 3 objects of natural curiosity which are generally visited by strangers, and this is still the case today, folks. The Giant's Arch, the Natural Pyramid, or Sugarloaf Rock, it's sometimes called, and Skull Rock. The former is a natural arch projecting from the precipice on the northeastern side of the island, about a mile from the town, and elevated 140 feet above the level of the water. Its abutments are the calcareous rock common to the island and have been created by the falling down of enormous masses of rock, leaving a chasm of 80 or 90 feet in height and crowned with an arch of 50 or 60 feet sweep, having the usual curve of facetious arches. The best view is from the beach at the water's edge looking up. On viewing it from above, you're obliged to approach it within 10 or 12 feet of the chasm which is produced before it can be distinctly seen, so that the effect of the perspective is lost. And I will add in there that, of course, we have railings and things like that today, so you don't fall to your death. The Natural Pyramid is a lone standing rock upon the top of the bluff of probably 30 feet in width at the base by 80 or 90 in height, of a rugged appearance and supporting in its crevices a few stunted cedars. It pleases chiefly by its novelty, so wholly unlike anything to be found in other parts of the world, and on first approaching it, gives the idea of a work of art. Its appearance is readily explained by its perceiving it to be a calcareous carbonate of the same character as that upon which it is based. and retaining its original geological situation, and by supporting it to be the relic of a stratum which formerly extended to that depth over the whole island. There is every appearance to justify the conclusion that such a decay of removal of rock matter has taken place. Keep in mind that ocean levels were much higher, 600 million years ago, and this whole area was underneath an ocean, and that's where a lot of this calcareous rock comes from. It comes from decomposing and settling shells and shell life, and it built up over time. That's why we have a lot of the geological formations we have today. Moving over to Skull Rock, it is chiefly noted as a cavern that appears to have been an ancient receptacle of human bones, many of which are still to be observed about its mouth. The entrance is low and narrow and seems to promise little to reward the labors of exploration. It is here that Alexander Henry was secreted by a friendly Indian after the horrid massacre of the British garrison at Old Michilimackinac in 1753. Funny, it's a massacre when the Indians win, but it's a victory when the British win. The present town of Michilimackinac is pleasantly situated around a small bay on the southern extremity of the island and consists altogether about 150 houses, several of which are handsomely painted. Its permanent population does not differ far from 450, but is sometimes swelled by the influx of traders, voyagers, and Indians to 1,000 or 2,000. The harbor is safe in all winds and sufficiently large to accommodate 150 vessels. Fort Michilimackinac stands on a rocky eminence immediately above town and at present garrisoned by a company of infantry under the command of Captain Pierce. Fort Holmes occupies the apex of the island and is not at present garrisoned. This fortress was erected by the British while they held possession of the island during the late war, and that was the War of 1812, as we call it today. But after the surrender of the island, the name was altered in compliment to the memory of Major Holmes, who fell in the unfortunate attack upon the island by Colonel Croghan. The town of Michilimackinac is now the seat of justice for a county of the same name, which has recently been erected in this part of the Michigan Territory. So it's important to note there's Fort Holmes, which is on the tippy top of the island, and there's Fort Michilimackinac, which is down the hill a bit, which is the large fort that everybody is familiar with. Oops. All right, so we won the War of 1812, and in consequence of a reported discovery of gypsum upon St. Martin's Islands, which was to belong to the Michilimackinac cluster, I was directed by Governor Cass to make a mineralogical survey of those islands and to report upon the quantity and the quality of the gypsum found. To convey me thither, an arrangement had been made with Captain Knapp, commanding the United States Revenue Cutter on this station. I was also accompanied by Captain Douglas of the expedition and Lieutenant Pierce of the Army. I went on board the cutter this morning at 10 o'clock. We were favored with a wind, and after accomplishing the object of the voyage, we returned to the harbor of Michilimackinac before dark. The St. Martin's Islands lie about 10 miles northeast of Michilimackinac. The largest is about 9 miles in circumference by 3 broad at the widest part, and consists of alluvial soil covered partly with a forest of oak, maple, and poplar. In no place does it attain an elevation of more than 20 feet above the level of the lake, and is subject to partial inundation in the spring when the sudden melting of the northern snows produces a rise of water in the lake. Embedded in the soil, which appears naturally fertile, we found large detached masses of gypsum of a very fine quality and unconnected with any adhering rock, so that no expense of blasting is necessary. The principal body of this mineral notice consists of the granularly foliated sulfate of lime mineralogy, mixed with scattered masses of the fibrous kind, very white and beautiful. Back in the day, gypsum was a very valuable mineral, so this was a big deal. Now, it's interesting to note, did it come from the rock formation or was it dragged on by glaciers from Canada? He did not speculate on that. A great variety in the color and varying degrees of intensity is found among the white, red, and dark chestnut brown predominate. Altogether, specimens bear a greater resemblance to the Nova Scotia gypsum, of which quantities are annually imported into the United States than any other numerous beds hereto discovered in New York. So he goes on and on about gypsum in this particular entry, and we will skip forward now to June the 9th. The island of Michilimackinac and the adjacent coast have been the theater of some of the most interesting events in the history of the settlement of the northwestern regions of our continent. In adverting to them, I shall apply the term modern to present town of Michilimackinac to distinguish it from the ancient town, which was situated on the extreme point of the peninsula of Michigan, about 3 leagues distant from the island. It appears from that hero that this settlement of the old town is due to the exhortations of Father Marquette, a French missionary who came here in 1671 with a party of Hurons who he prevailed on to locate themselves at that spot where a fort was constructed and it afterward became an important post. This was 8 years before La Salle's expedition through the lakes and was the first point of European settlement made northwest of Fort Frontenac, which is also known as, actually Fort Frontenac, the one they're talking about here is one that's on Lake Ontario. Neither Fort Niagara or Fort Pontchartrain, which is the present site of Detroit, then was in existence. The foundation of the former was laid by La Salle in 1678. The latter had not been erected when Lahontan passed through the country in 1688. Tonty, Hennepin, Charlevoix, and other French writers, when they speak of Michilimackinac, allude to the old peninsular fort. It continued to be the seat of the fur trade and the undisturbed rendezvous of the Indian tribes during the whole period that the Crown of France exercised jurisdiction over the Canadas. After the fall of Quebec in 1759, it passed by treaty into the possession of the British government, but much against the wishes of the Indian tribes, for whom the long habits of intercourse with the French entertained an attachment and a partiality which it was not easy to counteract. Such was the spirit of an animosity entertained by the Indians, that one of the first English traders, Alexander Henry, who ventured to visit Michilimackinac, found it necessary on his arrival and at that place in 1761 to conceal the circumstance of his nativity and to conduct his trade under the name of a French assistant whom he had employed. When the deception was found a few days afterwards, his goods were only saved to him by the fortunate arrival of a British garrison of 300 men who gave protection to the English trade and compelled the Indians for a time to smother their flame of animosity. It was only, however, to break forth with redoubled violence in the massacre of this garrison, which ensued about 18 months afterward, in 1763, while it exhibits one of the most shocking instances of Indian barbarity. It is at this time a striking proof of the sagacity and dissimulation of the Indian character. It appears from the very interesting account which is given of this transaction by Henry, who is an eyewitness, that the Indians were in the habit of playing at a game called bag-gataway, which is played with a ball and a bat on the principles of our football and decided by one of the parties heaving the ball beyond the goal of their adversaries. The King's birthday, 4th of June, having arrived, the Sacs and the Chippewas, who were encamped in great numbers around the fort, turned out upon the green to play at this game for a high wager, and attracted a number of the garrison traders to witness the sport. The game of bag-getaway is necessarily attended with much violence and noise. In the ardor of the contest, the ball, as it had been suggested, it cannot be thrown to the goal desired, is struck in any direction by which it can be diverted from that designated by the adversary. At such a moment, therefore, nothing could be less liable to excite premature alarm than the ball should be tossed over the pickets of the fort, nor that having fallen there, it should be followed on the instant by all engaged in the game, as well as one party as the other, all eager, all struggling, all shouting, in unrestrained pursuit of a rude athletic exercise. Nothing, therefore, can be more happily devised under circumstances than a stratagem like this, and was, in fact, the stratagem which the Indians employed to obtain possession of the fort. So basically, they threw the ball into the neighbor's yard, and they all went in and took over the fort. This event finally sealed the fate of the fort and the town, after having been the seat of the fur trade for 90-some-odd years. The Indians, after butchering the garrison, burnt down the fort, and the English afterward took possession of and fortified the island of Michilimackinac, which had previously given to the fort on the peninsula. No event of importance appears to have disturbed the tranquility or retarded the growth of the modern town for a long period, during which its trade and size were both considerably increased. During the American Revolution, we hear nothing of it except at the rendezvous of hostile tribes. By the Treaty of Paris in 1783, acknowledging the independence and fixing the boundaries of the United States, and this is after the Revolutionary War, folks. The treaty for the Revolutionary War determined the boundaries in general. It fell under the jurisdiction of the American government and was surrendered, according to Mackenzie, in 1794. And during the War of 1812, the fort was blah, blah, blah. Oh gosh, where'd it go? The fort was surprised by a body of British troops and maintained until surrendered by the Treaty of Ghent in 1814. So that was the end of the war with this treaty. In the meantime, an unsuccessful assault was made upon it by Colonel Croghan, who had distinguished himself in so conspicuous a manner in the defense of Fort St. Stephen's at Lower Sandusky. The death of the gallant major marked this assault. Holmes fell at the head of his column in attempting to drive the enemy from a commanding position. June 10th. Few persons have visited this island without being struck with the variety and delicacy of the fish which are caught in the vicinity. Among them we see two species of trout, the lake herring, black and white bass, sturgeon, muskellunge, whitefish, which is called tickamang to the Indians, pike, gar, perch, and catfish, with several other species of cartilaginous and shellfish. Of these, the whitefish is most esteemed for its richness and delicacy of its flavor, and there is a universal acquiescence in the opinion of formerly advanced by Charlevoix, quote, that when fresh or salted, nothing of the fish kind can excel it, unquote. We cannot, however, agree with the Baron Lahontan in the remark, quote, that if has one singular property, namely that all sorts of sauces spoil it. This fine fish is very abundant around the island and is taken with the hook and line. It has not heretofore been described in ichthyological works, but Governor Clinton is disposed to consider a nondescript species of the salmon genus. June the 11th. The geological character of the island of Michilimackinac presents some features which, so far as observations have enabled us to judge, are peculiar to it. It consists of a stratum of limestone of immense thickness based on a calcareous rock, in which a semicrystalline structure and almost entire absence of fossil remains prove its intermediate age. This formation is not elevated more than a foot above the level of the lake and extends horizontally under the island. It is overlaid by the rock forming the bluffs, which have so commanding an appearance on the approach to the island and attaining various elevations from 100 to 300 feet. Its compact structure and embedded fossils leave no doubt as to its posterior description, but what strikes us as peculiar in this formation is the circumstances of its being made up of fragments of both transition and compact limestone with cavities of carbonate of lime in the powdery form, together with small fragments of a species of striped flinty agate and innumerable small crystals of calcareous spar, thus giving a brachiodal appearance. It is to be observed, however, that no fragments of primitive rock are found in its composition, and that its calcareous fragments are acute, angled, and bear no marks of attrition. So he continues on talking about how these calcareous layers lay upon each other and go into great gory detail. Sounds like he was kind of kicking around Fort Holmes that day writing this description. All right, so now we moved on to June 12th, and now he's going to move on to the agriculture of the island. He mentions that the soil is not deficient in strength, and garden vegetables grow in great perfection. We have particularly remarked the dry and mealy quality of the potatoes, and have nowhere observed finer beets and cabbages. The small depth of soil is, however, unfavorable to forest fires, and firewood is scarce and building timber upon the island. A supply of these articles is produced chiefly from the neighboring islands of Boblo and Round Island. Stone for building and quicklime is abundant. There are several sheep, cattle, and horses on the island, all of which thrive well, and there is neither school nor preaching on the island. The town has a post office, a small jail, a council house in which the courts of justice are held.
There is no regular bred attorney, although 2 persons can occasionally practice. The only physician is the one attached to the garrison. There appears, therefore, in the present society of Mackinac, the want of a preacher, a schoolmaster, an attorney, and a physician. Of merchants, well, there are too many. The etymology of the word Michilimackinac admits of a ready explanation. It is a compound of the word missi or missil, signifying great, and Mackinac is the Indian word for turtle. From a fancied resemblance of the island to a great turtle lying upon the water. These are words of the Chippewa language. Harriot derives his name, but without much probability, from Imecanos, an Indian spirit supposed to have formerly inhabited the island. Since our arrival there has been a great number of Indians of the Chippewa and Ottawa tribes encamped near town. The beach of the lake has been constantly lined with Indian huts and bark canoes. Savages are generally well dressed in their own costume and exhibit physiognomies which are more regularity of features and beauty of expression than is common to find above them. You hear the word savages, that is usually a pronoun used to describe all Native Americans versus separating them out by their individual tribes like Chippewa and Ottawa. He was talking about some of the Indian foods and some of the things they did. They would make rush mats. They would make bark baskets filled with maple sugar. They made moccasins. They made shot pouches and other goods of Indian fabric, which are generally in demand, he says, mostly as articles of curiosity. The Indian trade is chiefly conducted by the American or Southwest Fur Company under the direction of Messrs. Stewart and Crooks. There are warehouses, stores, offices, boatyards, and other buildings, and they occupy a considerable part of the town plant, and the company furnishes employment to a great number of clerks, engagees, and mechanics, and contributes very largely to the general business of the island. As the amount of capital invested, we see a large quantity of furs annually returned into their warehouses, but we have no means of accurate information. It is said to be less profitable now than in a former period. This is because in 1820, the fur trade was definitely going to see a very sharp decline in the next few years, and they're already starting to notice it. And I actually have a whole other podcast that talks about that subject. That's pretty much, it's called The Demise of the Fur Trade. Check it out. He did find an account given by Mackenzie that gave an idea of how much furs came through in a single year, and it's a long list. I'll read through a few of them for you. 106,000 beaver skins, 4,600 otter skins, 6,000 lynx skins, 500 buffalo skins, that's pretty interesting, 3,800 wolf skins, 600 wolverine skins, and 750 deer skins. So obviously the fur trade was definitely declining if only 106,000 beaver skins came through the island in a year. So moving on, now he's starting to talk about some of the weather. The weather since our arrival upon the island has been cooler and more variable. We are informed that it is common during the month. Out of 6 days, 2 have been rainy and cloudy. The wind has prevailed from the southeast. The biggest point at which the thermometer has been observed, as we will be seen by a reference to the following meteorological register, is 63 degrees. Now, this is early June. It hasn't gone above 63 degrees yet. So the average high temperature for that particular week was 55, which is 11 degrees lower than what they were expecting. So he mentions that there's a fog in the mornings, and it's pretty common this time of year. And then he ends with some meteorological observations where he took measurements he took averages, and he took weather temps in the morning and afternoon, but it never got below freezing. But the lowest temperature I can find here was on June 9th for 41 degrees. And like he said, it was averaging about 55 to 56 degrees while he was on Mackinac Island. So now this is early June. We've all experienced Michigan Springs in early June, and know that this is not out of the ordinary to have days in the
50s and 60s, especially when you're surrounded by, the Great Lakes and its cooler temperatures. So it's to be expected, I guess. All right, so there's another episode of Lewis and Schoolcraft Expedition, Part 3, and we will continue this as he starts heading north and through the St. Mary's Straits into Lake Superior. All right, thanks a lot for joining me here at the Michigan Trails Reports. Stay tuned. We will continue to do these Lewis and Clarks probably about once a month here into the future. So feel free to always go back, subscribe, and check out all the content. We got up over 200 podcasts up and running. With that, I'll sign out. We'll see you again. Thanks for joining me.